Chapter 27. Mud's stomach leaped into his heart as he felt as his feet left the solid ground behind him. He hung suspended over the chasm for a moment, one hand clenching the rope and the other holding the lantern. Then he fell, but not in the direction he planned to go. Instead of dropping feet first into the chasm, blood rushed into his head as if he were hanging upside down, and he launched upward. He cried out in surprise, a wild shin filling him. It wasn't like flying, though. He had no control. He tumbled upward into the darkness and became disoriented. He rose at an alarming rate. Though his mind told him he was going up, his body felt like he was going down, speeding to a rocky death. Sharp stalactites came into view. He rushed toward them. The rope remained slack in his hand. It was too long and would not snap tight before he slammed into the deadly points. "Crack!" Mud yelled. "Stop me!" Below him, Karak laughed. The sharp rock points raced in Mud's face and chest like an army of spears. Mud slowed and floated gently to the stalactites. He twisted to avoid the points and came to rest against the surface. His head swam. He laid at the top of the cave, just the same as if he were lying on the ground. "Mud!" Hera called to him. "Are you all right?" "Yes," Mud answered. He stood, brushed himself off, and gazed down above him down to the others below. He couldn't see them. The lantern's light did not reach far enough into the darkness, or down into the darkness. Mud wasn't sure which. "This is too strange," he muttered. A faint silver glow in one of the stalactites caught his attention. "It's called reverse gravity," Crack shouted to him. "A silver dragon trick. I saw him use it to fight the dragon armies during the war." Mud couldn't help smiling as he pictured hordes of draconians flying into the air, where the dragons could snatch them up in their jaws or freeze them with a cone of cold air and send them tumbling back down to their deaths. "So, you did fight in the war," Mud called down while he made his way up to the glowing stalactite. "I thought you might have been a squire." Mud pried the glowing object from the damp snow. It was a small piece of silver, a quarter the size of his palm. It pulsed with silver light and warmed his hand. As soon as it came free, Mud fell, yelping. Wind rushed past him, tearing at his face and clothes as he plunged back down toward the others in the chasm below. "Crack!" Mud screamed. "I'm falling!" He slowed, making his stomach flip-flop, sliding the silver piece into his pocket. He held the lantern out to look for any sign on the far edge of the chasm. Below him, the others came into view, staring up at him from the chasm side. Mud twisted in the air and swam away from them. Bending his arms, kicking his legs, and tumbling sideways as he floated down, he managed to cross the chasm. Gradually, the other side came into view. He did a slow flip in the air and landed with his feet on the hard, reassuring stone. He grinned. His heart thudded with excitement. After it was all over, he'd have to convince Karak to let him practice flying like that from the top of what remained of Karaktor, the mountain near Potter's Mill. He tied off the rope to the stalagmite. With a lantern on both sides of the chasm, Mud could see across to where the others stood. "Come on over," he yelled. Iriden yelped. "Don't worry," Karak said, putting a hand on Iriden's shoulder. "I'll make sure you don't fall." He tied Iriden against his chest and swung down onto the rope and made his way across, hand over hand. Iriden kept his eyes squeezed shut and moaned all the way over. Drake Cutter followed, clinging to the rope with his hands and looping his knees over the top as well. He shimmering slowly across. Hera went last, swinging across as Herrick had done. Her face was red and she gasped for air by the time Mud grabbed her and helped her onto the smooth ground. While she recovered her breath, Mud pulled out the glowing silver piece and lifted it so he could see the tiny curved object. "I think it's part of a key." "Part of a key?" Karak frowned at him. "Yes," Mud said. "It's like the metal's been splintered somehow. The question is, what happened to the rest of the key?" "How do you know it's a key?" Drake Cutter asked, pointing at the tiny piece of silver. Hera smiled. "Mud knows a lot more about locks and keys than he does about fighting moles." Mud grimaced and slipped the key into his pocket. The passage they'd been following continued, though the ceiling lowered so Karak had to stoop to get through. Mud just had to duck his head. He'd grown a bit in the last few years, but he was still small for his age. Hera eased through behind him. "Mud, I don't like these tests," she said. "If that was the first one, how bad do you think the others will be?" "I'm sure it'll be great," Mud said with a laugh. "I've never had so much fun in my life." "I should have guessed you'd say that," Hera said, slapping his back. Despite his lightheartedness, Mud grew tense at the thought of the next test. Hera was worried about the danger. If Karak hadn't been with them, Mud would have died. The top of the cave dropped lower, forcing Mud to hunch over to continue. Cold water dripped on his face from the rocks only inches above him. He held the lamp out with one hand and gripped his sword hilt with the other. Only one mercenary had survived the path into the mountain, and they were skilled soldiers. A faint noise sounded from the cave ahead. Mud stopped and motioned for the others to be quiet. The noise came again, and then the sound of water dripping. The quiet chink of metal against metal, like chains rattling. "I don't like the sound of that," Harold whispered. Mud agreed, but continued forward, his curiosity piqued. Besides, the only other choice was to turn back, and he could never let Shannara down like that. Whatever tests lay ahead, he had to be ready to take them. The sound of chains grew louder, drifting to him intermittently as he crawled forward. Soon, muffled sobbing joined the whisper of chains in the plink of water. The passage opened up into a small muddy cavern, and Mud's eyes fell on a horrible sight. He froze with the lantern held in his hands as the others stepped out beside him. End of chapter.